Good morning. We are on Mystery of History, Volume 4. We're on page 38. We've been talking about the French and Indian War. And we had said that during the colonial times, the British and French were getting into more and more conflict because the British wanted to do what?
They wanted to control the 13 colonies again.
Not again, but they wanted to make it kind of like their home. They wanted to establish colonies and homes there, but the French didn't want as much to have homes and colonies. They wanted more what?
They wanted to make a profit.
Yes, trade routes for profit, which you still to some extent have to establish homes because somebody has to be there. But they were thinking more for trade routes. British was thinking more colony and expanding British Empire. Okay, now let's read this last part again. Tension was mounting when the French were building forts near the Great Lakes and into the Ohio River Valley. They established Fort Niagara, which is near Niagara Falls, Fort Detroit, and Fort Duquesne. And Fort Duquesne was near the mouth of the Ohio River, which the British said was theirs. The Ohio River starts in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and goes along West Virginia and Kentucky into the Mississippi River. So the Ohio River and its valley were critical for the French because they needed to connect the Great Lakes to the Mississippi River. And we looked at that up here. Look again here. The French were trying to connect the Great Lakes to the Mississippi River. And they needed this area because they've got a river running through it. It's a movie, A River Runs Through It.
I think that we have that movie.
We do. Anywho, they connected that they needed this, but the British were like, nope, this is ours. Okay, so conflict was mounting.
Was the British the one that wanted to put houses?
They were the ones who wanted to build like homes and expand the British Empire. France, they wanted trade routes. Now there was a young man named George Washington from Virginia. He was appointed by the British colonists to deliver a strong message to the French. Yes, the George Washington, the man on the dollar bill who became the first president. At 21, Washington was sent to the French-held forts in the Ohio Valley, and he told them to get out. That was in 1753. Okay, so he tells them to get out. The French refused. Washington was headed back to Virginia. He was going to tell the British the bad news. Bad news, they said no. Washington returned to the Ohio Valley in 1754 with much more than words. He led an ambush. So he comes back the next year. And he leads an ambush against the French patrol. 10 French soldiers were killed and they captured 21. Included in the capture was a commander of the French patrol, and he died while he was in captivity. According to historians,
Why did they give an ambush?
Because they had said they weren't going to get out of the Ohio River Valley, and the British had already said this was our land. They're saying, no, we're here. You can't be here too. And so they said, you need to get out. And the French said no. And they said, okay.
It's on.
That's fine. A wink, a wink. And then they came back.
Ambush.
According to most historians, this controversial ambush marked the start of the French and Indian War. Miss Hobart says, I say it's controversial because the French claimed that their patrol was only a peacekeeping mission when attacked by Washington. Regardless, George Washington built Fort Necessity in the Ohio Valley to mark his victory. So he built a fort to say, ha, we've won. Okay, so the fate of the Acadians. Do we remember who the Acadians were? I don't really. Let's look back. I think it might be even in a different chapter. All right. Let's see. We'll read. Tension in the Ohio River Valley grew worse and Fort Necessity was struggling to survive. Under the French and Indian attack, Washington eventually surrendered. Oh, he surrendered Fort Necessity. In response to the continued French resistance and reacting to the 7 Years' War in Europe, the British formulated a cruel plan. They decided they were going to expel a large group of the French settlers in Canada named the Acadians. The Acadians were Frenchmen who had settled in Acadia, that's in present-day New Brunswick, near Prince Edward Island in Maine. Here is New Brunswick up here. And here's Maine. Here's New Brunswick. So up here it says Acadia. So the French had settled up here in Acadia, and the British said they're going to kick them out. Okay, so that's their plan. Let's see why that's their plan, because so far that doesn't really make sense of a plan. In 1713, this was years before the French and Indian War, these French immigrants had been sold out to the British in a treaty. And in the process, part of Acadia was renamed Nova Scotia, which means New Scotland. Okay, here we go. Sorry, gotta look again at the map. This is Nova Scotia. There's Acadia. So there was some type of treaty, and the French was like, you can have them. You can have everybody who lives there. That's all yours. As the war began to brew between the British and the French Acadians that were in Nova Scotia tried to remain as neutral as possible. They were just farmers, and they weren't interested in siding with the British and the French together.
I think they got offended.
They weren't interested in siding with the British or the French. Nonetheless, the French Acadians refused to show allegiance to the British king, and they would not take up arms against the French in New Brunswick. She says, who would expect them to? The British considered the French Acadians threatening enough to finally order them that they all be deported. So in 1755, 6,000 of them were forcibly removed from Canada. Thousands were separated, packed up against their will, and marched away with no explanation. The Acadians who lived up here. But where were they marching? See? Because they're up here. That's kind of a hard place, Cruz. You need to be looking. It's a hard place to march from, because you can't go that way. There's nothing but ocean. You have to go all the way around here. Where are they going? Let's find out. They're marching them away from there.
Maybe Louisiana.
The homes, maybe, yeah. Oh, that's where we read about it. I was wondering.
Oh.
Friends, we just read about the Acadians in our book on Louisiana. I was wondering why I couldn't find them in here.
I was going to say, wasn't it earlier in the book or in Benjamin Franklin?
Yeah, it wasn't. It was in our other book on Louisiana. So cool. So, let me see. The homes they left behind were burned to the ground. Here is a picture, a view of the plundering and burning of the city of Grimross. It depicts the burning of the French Acadian settlement in Canada. So they just burned their homes.
How rude.
Very rude. The homes, eventually 11,000 of the Acadians were removed between 1755 and 1763. Some went back to France. So how did they get them there? Did they offer them a ship? Did they have to find their own way? Look, Cruz, some went to Louisiana and became known as the Cajuns.
You read about them.
A distinct ethnic group found in Louisiana. A famous poem called Evangeline, A Tale of Acadie, was written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow to commemorate this horrible treatment of the French Acadians. I'm going to finish this little section here. Caleb, can you keep down the blasting noises? Pew, 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 pew. Now, I'd rather not even bring this up, she says, but most historians would agree, but she still will. But most historians would agree that the expulsion of the French Acadians had something to do with leftover issues from the Protestant Reformation. You see, the French Acadians were mostly Roman Catholic, and the British were mostly Protestant. As you know, the Reformation put the Protestants against the Catholics.
I didn't know that the British were mostly Protestants. I thought they were all Roman Catholic.
Not Roman Catholic. They were a mixture, kind of. They weren't Catholic, which makes them sort of Protestant. But remember, they were the English church. They used a lot of the same rituals because what was his name? Was it Henry VIII, I think? He was the one that declared that he was no longer a part of the Catholic Church because they wouldn't let him get divorced.
He divorced about 5-6 times because he had like 6 wives.
So it was kind of a mixture. It was like a mixture of some of the rituals of the Catholic religion with some of the Protestant ideas, and anyway. So I'm not exactly sure what she means here by they're mostly Protestant. That is a good question, because does she mean like truly Protestant? Meaning there's truly Protestant, I don't think is a part of the English church. But I could be wrong. But yeah, I'm not sure what she means. But what she definitely means is not Catholic. Against the Catholic. Because for sure Henry VIII was upset with the Pope. And they broke away. So, while the worst part of the Reformation in Europe had passed, there were still lingering conflict and resentment and bitterness that would fuel events like this. So, it was like, because there were deep-seated conflicts that hadn't been resolved, that people had not gotten over in their heart, when a little conflict arose that didn't have anything to do with it, they were like, oh yeah, well, since you're Roman Catholic, let's take it to the next level. And she says, as a closing note on the Acadians, it might encourage you to know that later in history, thousands of Acadians moved back to Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and other parts of Canada, and many of them still speak French. And despite the turmoil of the French and Indian War, Acadians have maintained a proud identity. I'm wondering if Canada is where the name Acadians comes from, or if it was already named Canada, because I would like to know that.
Maybe we should look it up. Unfortunately, I can't look it up now because it's recording.
Okay, so we're on page 40. We're still on this French and Indian War, because this is kind of a long one, but we're going to stop there. Bye!